this on, but I think it's too... Can you hear me if I do that? No. Okay, I'm going to have to put it like this. Thanks so much for being here. This session is a transmedia approach to learning. And I really am approaching this a little bit more as a workshop, so I'm hoping that we'll do a little discussion together. So if you're comfortable where you're sitting, that's great. But if you want to move forward, that might be a little bit easier for discussion. I'm not going to make you. Nobody's moving, so okay. You can stay where you are, no problem. So first up, I want to get a sense of who's in the room here. How many of you are classroom teachers? Okay. And so does that, then are some of you administrators?
Media specialists.
Or that was media or technology specialists? Great. Any librarians? No. A few? Okay. And then grades? How many of you are doing pre-K through 3? Okay, a few. And then just elementary? Okay. Middle school? Any high school folks here? A few. Okay. Thank you, first of all, for just giving me a sense of who is here. I'm interested in how many of you came here because of the word transmedia. Is that a word that many of you know or interested in? Okay, I only had like 2 people raise their hand. So someone who raised your hand, how would you define transmedia? Video applications. Okay. Media-based. Mm-hmm. Media-based video and applications. In the back?
Transmedia is the ability to tell a story or a narrative over different types of media sources,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be commercial ad, TV ad, newsprint, or web banner. But each one of them talks about one specific topic in the whole narrative.
Mm-hmm.
That when you hear all of the media together, it tells the story.
Right. So in that case, did everybody hear what he said? Okay. So in that case, that version of transmedia would be you would have to see every version in order to piece together kind of what's happened. Okay. So that's definitely one definition. And you mentioned like ad banners and things like that. Transmedia comes up a lot in marketing terms as ways of kind of giving people all different inroads into something. One of my favorite examples is from several years ago, Snakes on a Plane. Do you all remember that there was a phone number you could call and Samuel Jackson would call one of your friends and say their name and be like, there's snakes on the plane. So that was kind of a transmedia gimmick for marketing for the movie. Other definitions of transmedia, that absolutely is one. The idea of it being cross-platform is absolutely correct as well. Other definitions are that a world is so consistent in a story that it can exist in multiple media types. And so you don't necessarily have to see every single thing to put it together. And other ideas are that the story must be completely consistent across all these different media types. So sometimes transmedia is we're telling the same story in different forms, and some versions of it are you've got to piece it together by all these different forms. One thing that I'm really happy that this gentleman in the back said newsprint, because often people think of transmedia as just being digital or media kind of presentation. But the truth is transmedia often branches over also into books and into storytelling. So it doesn't have to be actually contained in media itself, some kind of form of media. So, okay, transmedia. I think you all know who I am. My name is Sara DeWitt, and I am from PBS Kids. And my job day to day is to work with the producers who create PBS Kids shows to think about how those shows will be extended into digital media platforms. And so that's thinking about how they're going to extend their shows into streaming video. Often it's just a one-to-one, like here's your show, and now we're gonna encode it and stream it. But sometimes it is actually some original online video as well that can be connected to their show. The majority of what we spend our time on in my team, though, is developing games for the PBS Kids properties, and thinking about how to make sure that the games are consistent not only with the storyline as it appears on television, but also with the educational goals as they are laid out for that show or that property. So, for example, how many of you have seen Curious George on PBS Kids? Very popular show, #1 show for kids 2 to 5 for like 8 years straight. How many of you knew that show is based on an engineering curriculum? Yes, Susan Adams from New Hampshire Public Television. She knew it. Curious George actually has a very specific curriculum that it is based on, and it was so organic and natural to the character because he's this curious monkey. He takes things apart, he puts things back together. It made a lot of sense for him to be doing engineering. So the next time you see it, the next time you're with a child and you're watching, notice that they talk about gears and pulleys. They talk about the wind necessary to fly a kite. They talk about making maps to find your way back. They talk about making diagrams and plans. There's a lot of really rigorous educational stuff happening in Curious George in every single episode. So the way PBS works, and this is important as we get into the storytelling piece of Transmedia, the way PBS works is slightly different from other networks. So when Nickelodeon or when Disney get a show, they buy that show outright from the creator, and it becomes it's owned by Disney or Nickelodeon. And then they have kind of free reign for how they present it. PBS, being public media, doesn't have as much money, first of all, to buy shows. But also, PBS has been very committed to allowing the creators of the shows to retain ownership of the shows. So when we option a show, we actually are getting an exclusive license to present it. And that means that the creator, whoever was involved in the development of that show concept, stays with the show, with PBS, through as many seasons as we go through. So Arthur, we're going on, I think, season 18 now. Carol Greenwald has been working with the author of the books, Mark Brown, every single season for 18 years. They step back and they think about what are the themes going to be this season. They think about what the new stories are going to be, and they're very involved in the creative process. The reason why that's important is that most people who work with Transmedia and do research on Transmedia feel like the most successful versions are the ones that have a single creator who can really help look at the vision across the board. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. But when it comes to PBS Kids shows, when a producer comes in, when we greenlight a show, we sit down with the producers and we start to say, okay, not only is this going to be a television show, I need you to think about its applications in the digital realm. So how are your games going to be completely organic and interesting and connected to the show? And is there a way for show and game and show to kind of go back and forth together? And then the third thing that we always ask for, because we are made up of member stations throughout the country who do hands-on work, is what is the offline experience of this show going to be? Beyond kids just wanting to play the show in the backyard, which happens a lot. We know that kids sit down and pretend that they are Chris and Martin Kratt out exploring, looking for animals in their own backyards. We get stories about that all the time. Beyond just playing the show, what are some things that kids can do in a hands-on way outside of the show and the digital games? And so the producers then are in this really interesting space. Some of them are really excited about it. Some of them are just terrified that they're walking into the situation. But they're in this interesting space of thinking about how their narrative can extend across all these different realms. So the two transmedia experts that we at PBS have paid the most attention to are Jesse Schell, who is a game designer from Schell Games in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Jeff Gomez, who is probably the most famous transmedia person in Hollywood. He really is part of LA, and name a movie that has an interesting transmedia extension, and Jeff Gomez probably had something to do with it. I wanted to mention these two men because both of them have really interesting talks online, and if you are interested in transmedia and want to learn more about it, then these are two people to kind of look forward to watch what they're doing. Henry Jenkins, who is a professor at MIT, is one of the people who is credited with coining the phrase transmedia storytelling. And he has a very specific definition of what it is. And so this is an area of academic discussion, and Henry Jenkins does a lot of that. But when it comes to actual practical development and practical applications, these are the two that we have been paying the most attention to and what they do. And before I get into some examples in the greater world of transmedia properties, I'd like everybody just to take a minute and think about one of your favorite narratives, if it's a book or a movie, and it can be from your childhood as well. Think about one of your absolute favorite things. And then think about the ways that you might have interacted with that story outside of just reading the book or watching the movie. Does anyone have a favorite they're willing to share? Yes.
My favorite story as a child was Little House on the Prairie.
All right,
Of course,
Little House.
I watched all the TV shows, and now I actually do a Girl Scout program where we pretend to be on the prairie and we act it out.
Oh, great. Okay, that's an awesome example. Little House on the Prairie. That one hasn't come up in any of my conversations, but that's a perfect one because the series of books became a TV show, and definitely, I mean,
And there's so much marketing, you could buy all kinds of
Right.
dolls.
And one time when I was doing a presentation about transmedia, someone tweeted during it, and I really wish they had raised their hand and asked me. They tweeted, "Is this transmedia or transmarketing?" And I was like, it's a fine line sometimes. Jeff Gomez's work is going to be a lot more about transmarketing. But that also can be an interesting way to get into the story. So it's not necessarily all about buying stuff, but it is interesting to see how these things continue. Any other examples from out there? In the back?
I think Where the Wild Things Are was a great book that didn't really transfer as well.
Right.
But I wonder if it would be for games and stuff.
Where the Wild Things Are, I think you're right. That's one that hasn't really extended yet. I mean, there's been a movie, but it hasn't really taken off in a kind of transmedia space. Yes, right here.
So I was a big Anna Green Gables fan.
Anna Green Gables, yeah.
This week's Google Doodle was excellent. But,
Right.
But I mean, I remember as a kid, we went to Prince Edward Island and we saw they had the musical of Anna Green Gables, and we had the cassette, and we did the musical at home, and we, just did a lot of imaginative play, things like that.
That's great, yeah. All right, any others you want to throw out there?
I was just thinking about Polar Express.
The Polar Express.
Because not only do you have the book and the movie, but now this train companies that run Polar
Right,
Express.
train companies that run Polar Express in addition to the books and the movie. Yes, that's a great example. Yeah, and Jesse Schell would say that the story of Santa Claus is one of the most successful ever transmedia stories as well. I watched him lecture about that, and I was like, whoa, mind blown by that one. And kind of going through the origins of that story and how it's extended. But yes, Polar Express is a really good one. So none of you have stated the one that I feel like is always the most obvious, is Star Wars. And this is a transmedia property that has defied all space and time. I think that it has extended in ways that I'm not sure even George Lucas imagined from the beginning. And this one, the experts have kind of mixed opinions about how successful their transmedia has been. Certainly episodes 4, 5, and 6 have a great following. There are a lot of people who really latched into that story and know the story really well and think about different incarnations of those stories, but then dismiss episodes 1, 2, 3. So some people feel like episodes 1, 2, 3 departed too much. We'll see what happens with the hype with the next one. One of my favorite Star Wars kind of transmedia experiences, and I'm sorry, I don't have it here for you, and I've forgotten the name. I had a little internet problem coming into the room. But there is a version of Star Wars where all of the scenes were broken up, and then people were encouraged to do their own versions of those scenes and upload it. Does anyone, I think it's Star Wars Uncut, is that what it's called? So if any of you have seen that, it's just hilarious, because in some cases people have animated scenes, in other places people have acted the scenes out. Sometimes they've acted them out with cats, sometimes they've acted them out with puppets, they've done costumes or no costumes. It's fascinating to see how different people have interpreted different scenes from Star Wars, and then you can watch different versions of the movie in any incarnation. Every time you watch it, it's different. So definitely the fan base has really, really gotten into this. Another huge one that probably is big with a lot of students is Harry Potter. And this is one example of an excellent, very consistent transmedia experience. And that is because J.K. Rowling is involved in every single incarnation of it. So from the beginning when she created the books, most people would agree that her books are very consistent about following the rules. I know some people have here and there found little, inaccuracies between the books, but generally, there is a story that is consistent about who Harry is, the world he lives in, the way magic works, the way magic doesn't work. There are very clear rules for how Harry Potter works. And the author then has had a hand in watching how it has evolved from place to place. So has anyone been to the Universal Harry Potter worlds? It is really, really fun. You walk in and you feel like you are in the books and you are part of it. And of course it also feels like you're in a movie because you've got the movie characters around. But talk about a real immersive experience. That's a real life experience. It's very fun. The Pottermore website then has continued with that. Her extra books about the mythical creatures and all those other pieces have just played into kind of all the backstory. Harry Potter also is a really good example of ones that have then spawned fan fiction, of people who then take it to another level and write their own pieces. And the ones that have been heralded as being the most successful are the ones where people have really paid attention to the rules. The magic never kind of varies. It always works in the same way. Some of the examples that I've heard of that were not as successful, one of the case studies I read was about, the Disney Fairies franchise. There was a point where the way that Disney had rebooted all the princesses, they decided to reboot all the fairies. And they were using Tinkerbell and the fairies from Cinderella and kind of bringing them all up. But what they did is they hired one group, actually Shell Games, to do the immersive world online called Pixie Hollow. They hired an author to write the backstory for all these different fairies. And then they had the versions of the fairies from the movies. They didn't bring all of those people together. And so in Pixie Hollow, the way you become a fairy is something about finding magic fairy dust. They all live in trees. In the books, there was a completely different origin story for how these fairies became fairies. It wasn't a consistent experience, and I think we would all agree we don't know as much about those fairies as we do about the princesses. It's a great example of how they didn't have a clear set of rules, and so there wasn't a nice, clearly defined place to play with the stories, because it kind of veered all over the place. Pokemon is one of the first children-focused transmedia properties that I think really, really was hugely successful in its transmedia incarnations. It started with the card games. The person who created the card game had already thought about the backstory for all of these different characters. So when it moved into television, it already had the rules for how the Pokemon interacted, how the different characters interacted. It already had all of that space there. I remember, this is in the 90s, going to probably 98, going to the Pokemon movie with my niece who was 8, and she brought her Pokemon trading cards notebook with her to the movie. And during the movie, which, by the way, is terrible. I don't know if any of you all have seen the Pokemon movie. It's really hard to sit through as a grown-up. through the movie, I stopped watching the movie and started just watching the audience, because every time a new character would appear on screen, all the kids would start rustling through their notebooks, whispering to each other. Kids were getting up and walking over to other kids who were saying, "Who is that? Wait, what are his, can't remember if it's powers or abilities. What are his abilities?" And they, all of a sudden, all these kids were working around, they were taking notes. This was, watching the movie actually gave them an advantage in the game. And so there was a strategy piece to paying attention to these different incarnations of Pokemon, which is pretty fascinating and takes a lot of coordination by someone to really put it all together. So just a really, really interesting case study here. So how is all of this relevant? Why does this matter in education? We constantly talk about at PBS the importance of those characters and being able to connect with kids. So our head of children's programming, the one who kind of chooses the shows that go on our air, and at least shepherds them through the process, always says she's not necessarily looking for complex stories, and she's definitely not looking for high concept ideas, because those only work for an episode or so. What she wants to see are very complex characters who then can be in simple situations, but because the characters are so complex, there's so much you can do with that character. There are so many ways they have to work their way through the experience. And because of that, the characters then are more relatable to the audience who's watching. Our goal is that a child will watch this show and love that character so much that they really see this character as a friend, as someone that they can trust, as someone they can interact with, someone they want to play with, someone who can teach them things. I mentioned in the previous session, we know that there's some research going on at Georgetown right now about kids' interactions with characters. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Elmo broccoli study. Do people know about this study? There was a study several years ago where they came into a preschool and offered kids a choice of a snack. And the choice was, would you like a piece of chocolate or would you like a piece of broccoli? And over 80% of the children chose the chocolate. It's really kind of more amazing that almost 20% of the children chose broccoli, but most of them chose the chocolate. And then they came into a preschool and the broccoli was in a package with Elmo on it. And the children were much more likely to choose that. Not more likely, they still knew chocolate was awesome, but the percentage went way up. So that's more about packaging, and certainly says a lot about marketing and how different foods with characters on it can make a difference. And I'm not going to get into that because that's an area that PBS feels kind of concerned about using these characters for marketing. But what this research at Georgetown and then is taking us another level is, if it's a character that you know and trust, are you more likely to learn from them? And what the early results are is yes, that if it is a Daniel Tiger, if it's an Elmo, if it's someone they already know and feel like they interact with daily, they're more likely to kind of listen to that character and want to interact with them and really think about what they're saying. So we started an experiment with transmedia development with PBS Kids characters. And the idea was that the hypothesis that we brought into this was that if we're talking about Curious George, if we're talking about Dinosaur Train, Curious George is space and engineering, we're talking about Dinosaur Train, which is natural sciences and species differentiation. If we know that there is a wonderful story that kids really connect to, and then we're layering education on top of that, will a child who engages with that property on more than one in more than one media type come away with a better understanding of the skills that are presented than a child who only interacts with it in one way, a child who only watches it on television or who only plays with it in a gaming experience. So a lot of that fueled the research I talked about in the previous talk, the Ready to Learn transmedia work, where we were going into schools and having kids play games and watch videos and do offline activities over a period of time. And what we saw was multiple media types really did make a difference. When you were layering pieces on top, it really worked. So what I want to do is walk through a couple of examples of shows that we've developed since we did this testing with Transmedia, and kind of show you how we put pieces together so you can kind of see what's happening in the background. But what I want to get to is a conversation about applications in a classroom setting, and how you take that to another level, and how you build this into hands-on activities. So I'm going to sit down, and we're all going to hope that the technology is now working and that we get to watch a video. So how many of you are familiar with Odd Squad? A few of you. Yeah, I love Odd Squad. Yes, I'm so glad to hear you say that. Odd Squad is one of the newest shows on PBS. As you can see, it is live action. And basically the idea is that there is an agency all run by kids to explore odd happenings. The curriculum for it is math. And so in every episode, I won't be showing you a piece of this, but in every episode at some point the kids are like, okay, I need to go to the math room. And so they all go to the math room, and that's where they get to like draw things on the walls and figure out their problem. But these group of kid agents have to go solve math issues that are happening in the community. So one of my favorite ones is all the zeros in town are disappearing, and the kids have to go in and investigate what's happening with the zeros and why is zero important anyway. One of them is about to turn 10, and suddenly he's about to turn 1, and there's panic, you know. So these kids are investigating odd happenings. So I'm going to let this clip kind of speak for itself, and then we'll talk about the education when it's over.
Okay, set the method to work. As long as Senator Ford made all 100. How many do we have? 1, 2, 3. No, was that 3? I can't count. Hang on. No, where are you going? Don't leave me with these things. 2. This box will hold 10 senators each. If we just fill the box, we won't have to count because we know it's 10. I can't hear what you're saying. What are you saying? So we have 10 in each box. That means we have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. 50 senators. Right. And if we start with 100, and now we have 50, we have 50 left to go. We're halfway done.
All right. What's the goal we're trying to achieve there? Counting by tens, yes. Counting by tens, and then also that grouping things together actually can help you with counting. All of our shows have educational advisors who are involved in the development, and so we spend a lot of time, you know, they come up with the awesome concepts, like you've got Senate GURPS flying everywhere, and then we work with the advisors to figure out what are the best ways to help show that kind of thing. Okay, so the Senate GURPS episode airs on pbskids.org, and sorry, I lost my game. Hold on. This is always the most dangerous thing to demo a game live, because it's really hard to play and talk at the same time. But don't hold it against me if I do a poor job capturing Senate GURPS.
There you are. Something very odd has happened. 100 Senate GURPS are loose in headquarters. Odd Squad needs you to help catch them.
So this is you as an agent now, your agent avatar. And
Collect 10 centigrams. New box. Use this box to count out by 5s. Use the arrows on your computer's keyboard to pick up a box to catch centigrams. Once a box is full, you can get a new box. 5. 10.
okay, so I think you all can see exactly what's going on there. It's trying to then take that exact same concept from the show. Senate GURPS are loose, and we need to go capture them in headquarters. Now you're the agent, you're getting the assignment from Miss O, just like they're doing in the show, and you need to go collect center groups in groups of, we're starting with 5s, it'll also be 10s. It changes as the game progresses. And like all of our games, as soon as you start to be successful, it starts to get a little bit more complicated. So you're collecting at different levels. Then, on top of that, we then have some offline activities where you are playing with manipulatives and you're trying to then group things by 5s or 10s. This philosophy of trying to take the exact story and then, with that educational goal, and then bring it into the kids' hands and have them play it, has been really, really interesting to see. The kids who've seen the episode are like, you don't need to tell me what to do. I know how to get right in here and play this. Some of the feedback we're getting is that the kids actually don't want to be their own avatars, they want to be one of those characters. They want to be Olive or Otto playing. And so I think that's a really exciting extension of this, that, I'm glad that kids sometimes want to be their own agent, but the fact that they want to play the show, I think, is a great testament to how fun this show is. So last summer, PBS did a series of Odd Squad camps with kids. Did you all do one in New Hampshire? Okay. I think it's going to be extended, and so I'm hoping that just a few states did it this last year, but I'm hoping more will do it. And over 5 days, then kids had to go through training to become an agent. And at the end of the 5 days, they get their badge. They're now an official Odd Squad agent. It's truly a math camp, but it was all based on these different quests and ideas. So trying to put it into a real hands-on experience. More in kind of the trans marketing kind of idea of trying to bring kids into these experiences. Last year, there was a big new episode of Odd Squad where a rogue agent Odd Todd, came back and was wreaking havoc all through headquarters, and he released a pineado in headquarters, and the kids had to go around and collect all the pies. So that happens in the episode, and actually on air, Miss O, who is the head of the agency, says, Odd Todd has also attacked the Odd Squad website headquarters. We need your help. And so online, when you came to the homepage of pbskids.org, it had been all taken over by Odd Todd. And you had to play this Odd Squad pineado game where you're taking the shapes and pulling them in to try to close up the holes in the pineado. It's a little like a tangram kind of game in order for pbskids.org to get back to normal. The same thing happened, we didn't have the pineado shot because I didn't capture it the day it happened, but there's an Odd Squad takeover. And then we have a virtual world on pbskids.org called Cart Kingdom. And we introduced a bunch of Odd Squad avatars into Cart Kingdom around the time that this was happening, and you could start making your own cart to look like Odd Squad. The curriculum for Cart Kingdom is systems thinking, so it worked really nicely with Odd Squad. And then the same day that this happened, all of a sudden there were pineados in Cart Kingdom. So anywhere you went on pbskids.org, not to Daniel Tiger or Curious George, because that wasn't the right age group, but anywhere you went in the places where you might be playing older games, you were having to deal with this issue that had happened everywhere. And it was really one of our more successful episode days ever. There seemed to be a real loop of kids played the game and then wanted to go watch the episode. And what we saw with the gameplay is on the back end, we could see kids getting better and better at the game throughout the day. It was kind of like the more they were interacting with the curriculum in the different spaces, like on television, the better they got at actually plugging those pineado holes to make things go back to normal. Curious George did a big transmedia experiment with 16 games. 4 of those were ones that I mentioned during the keynote. They all come from this area called Curious George's Busy Day. And so this is all based on early numeracy and counting skills, so very early preschool. But it was 16 games that kind of were all things that George might be doing in one day. So if you've watched any episodes of George, you know that these are the kinds of things he does all the time. And so it was kind of a day in the life of George, and all of these games were then connected thematically. So this one didn't have as much of a narrative pull. It wasn't like George is in trouble and you have to help him. It more was, I'm gonna go through a day as if I was George and do things that are very consistent to George's world. And it all happens to be connected to this math curriculum. This has been very well studied and is really one of our most successful in terms of math skills acquisition. What I wanted to point out to you, though, is in the right-hand corner, there's a little a button for teachers. Most of these games work really well on interactive whiteboards, and the producers of this also then created a whole library of Curious George assets that are available for teachers to pull in to other things that they might be teaching. So to be able to pull George assets and things from these games into your own created lessons in a digital environment. So this is all free, and I really encourage you to take a look. It's a really fun suite of tools. So the next one I want to show is Peck Black Cat. How many of you are familiar with this show? Yeah, we have a big PBS Kids fan back there. Okay, 2.5-year-old, that'll do it. So Peck Black Cat was created again after a lot of this first research on math and transmedia. And the idea is that Peg and her sidekick Cat basically wake up each day in a word problem. And they have to use math to figure out how to get out of the situation. If you've watched the show, every day they are in a different environment. Sometimes they're on a farm, sometimes they're in outer space, sometimes they're on a desert island. One of the things that's really important about this show is not only were we trying to walk through specific math concepts and introduce them to kids and help them work through the problem, we also were at the same time trying to model good strategies for dealing with problem solving. So at some point in an episode, Peg always hits a wall and she starts to freak out and she says, "I'm totally freaking out." And Cat says to her, "Hold up." He blows a whistle, he goes, "Hold up." And she says, "That's right. I need to count backwards from 5 to calm down." And so every episode we have a moment where she goes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And usually by the time she's calmed herself down, the answer, or at least a way of finding the answer, has occurred to her. So really trying to model ways of dealing with problems. And so that's another kind of piece of transmedia we've seen, is when kids are really into characters, they will also take on the characteristics of those characters. And we wanted kids to do this the way the Cat does. Take a minute and calm down. So the episode I want to show you, and this is one of the ones I was having trouble come up, so I really hope it works, is on non-standard measurement. And it's a lot of fun. Let's see.
Never going to believe this, but somewhere on this desert island there's fairy treasure!
Gosh!
Sorry, but it's only like the most exciting thing ever!
Yeah!
And we have just the right tools to find it. Our friend Ramon gave us this map and a measuring stick to help us.
It's just as tall as me!
And it's perfectly straight, which means it's right for measuring things.
And for dancing.
The map will tell us exactly where we need to go to find the treasure. This looks like the banana tree where we are right now. The map says we need to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stick lengths along the shore to a big old rock where we'll find our next clue.
5 stick lengths? We only have 1 stick.
We don't need 5 sticks to get there, Cat. We can measure our way just using this 1 stick.
We can? What a great stick!
No time for dancing, Cat. Let's start measuring our way to the treasure.
But how?
To learn to measure, you listen to me. Put that stick down next to this banana tree. Keep it pointing straight, don't let it roll or bend. Mark it carefully at the other end. The distance from that tree to this mark in the sand is the length of 1 stick.
I think I understand.
All we have to do is keep repeating the same exact thing until we make 5 lines in the sand.
Easy!
Kinda. We have to do it very carefully so we don't make any mistakes.
Yes!
Put the stick on the line and mark the other end. That makes 2, do it again. Now put the stick on the line and mark the other end. That makes 3, do it again.
the stick on the line, I mark the other end. That makes A. What happened?
A wave came up and washed our measuring stick away.
What?
I think we've got a big problem.
Oh, my stick!
The stick is gone.
My sweet stick!
It's probably drifted all the way to China by now.
My beautiful stick!
We've lost our only chance at finding the buried treasure. No!
And I've lost the best dancing partner I ever had. We were exactly the same height. No!
That's it. You and the stick were exactly the same height.
I know.
And since height standing up is the same as length lying down, we don't need the stick to measure our way to the treasure. We can use your body instead.
This body?
Let's try it. But remember, we have to be very careful. Measuring with cats is a tricky trick. Lie straight and still.
Okay.
Think like a stick.
I'm a stick.
Feet on the line, no space between. All mark your ears, stay calm and serene.
Sorry.
If we've got patience,
And I stay still.
to a measure to bury treasure. Yay! Keep your feet on the line, now mark the other end. We've got the hat, do it again. Now put your feet on the line, and what a shock!
That makes 5 is a big old rock. It works.
And so, problem solved. The problem is solved. We solved the problem. Problem solved.
All right, so several lessons in there, right? Non-standard measurement, how do you make sure that you've got it clear? But then also, how do you find something that's the same size and work with it? We then, every episode of Peck Black Cat includes, kind of like Odd Squad always goes into the math room, Peg does math in the bath. And so every episode, whoa.
Very treasure. Good work. So,
Every episode includes her doing something in her real bathroom, not in one of these crazy places.
we're splashing in the bathroom. Get it up. Sit on the floor. Splashing, splashing, splashing some more. Welcome to the bathroom, where the pirate secret map will lead us to
The Great Banana!
We start at the tunnel of tissue and go 3 sand squares.
1, 2, 3.
To the rare tropical shampoo bush. Then we go 3 more.
1, 2, 3.
There, by now tub X marks the spot.
Ding! Ding, 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 ding. The Great Banana!
You okay in there?
We're covered in great banana, so yeah, we're okay. Help us find more buried treasure. Good work, totally rocking website at pbskids.org. Till then, we're Peck Black Cat, splashing some more.
Okay, so the goal there was actually, oops,
We're splashing in.
it's so great. I thought you'd want to see it again. The goal there is really to model for kids. Now, how would you play this at home? What could you make at home? What could you use with your own materials to try to create this kind of experience? So definitely a lot of fun and tied thematically to what kids have seen in the episode, but trying to use real world materials. And then we also had then an offline activity so you could print a cat measuring tool. So you could use a standard ruler, or you can also use a cat to do some non-standard measurement. So we're at 11:15. What I wanted to share with that one is that was a very clear thematic tie, narrative tie, excuse me. So you're playing with this, you're on this desert island, you're trying to find the buried treasure, and then let's give you an example of a way that you can play this at home with things that you have, so you can also play this, but we've still got the math in there. We're still trying to get to, you've got to be very careful about your pacing to find the next thing. There are other ways that we've explored transmedia, which is by introducing a concept in one scenario, but then it shows up later in a completely different kind of scenario. And just in the interest of time, I want to make sure we have some time for questions and discussion. I'm not going to show all of this. But basically, Peck Black Cat does a lot of work around the number 100. and what 100 means. Because for a lot of preschoolers, 100 is the biggest number they can imagine. And so 100 is much bigger than 10, which is much smaller. We work with advisors to just everything down to even Peg's gestures. I don't know if you've noticed when she said, because length is the same standing up as lying down, and she had Peg up and down and then lay him down to show. All of those things are really recommended to us by different teachers and educational advisors to be trying to show things through her gestures and through her movements wherever possible to try to reinforce. So that idea of 100 being really, really big and that it's bigger than 10 comes up over and over again throughout multiple stories. So as we think about transmedia and kind of a classroom experience, like obviously we're trying to make materials that are ready to go. Like it's kind of plug and play. You've got this video you watch, you've got this game to do. But if you are dealing with a classroom of kids who are super, super into Harry Potter, there are things you can do trying to stay true to those transmedia principles to help engage in learning through other curriculum areas. So I know that the same woman I mentioned who's head of children's programming, she has a daughter who is 10. Yes, she's 10 years old. Her whole class is really, really into Harry Potter right now. And so into it that the teacher on parent-teacher night said, this particular class is so into this story, I'm going to go with it, and we're actually going to start sorting into houses. And so as a classroom, they now have sorted into their houses, and they're doing a lot of writing assignments around Harry Potter. And you know, my colleague is all about this, but some parents aren't as comfortable with it. But an interesting way to kind of extend it. I have some videos that I wasn't able to pull up, but I can share with anyone who'd like to follow up. One of my really closest friends is a fourth grade teacher in Nashville, Tennessee. And on Star Wars Day, on May the 4th, they always do a Star Wars related activity. And the most recent one he did was he had them program their Lego Mindstorms to blow up the Death Star. And the Death Star was a balloon. And so the kids had to get it to go through the track to then hit the balloon and blow it up. This was like a hugely popular activity, and there were tons of Facebook videos going up from kids not showing their faces to share kind of what they were doing with this. He also does Joseph Campbell's Power of Myth with Star Wars, to have kids think about the hero narrative and then write their own hero narrative. He said it only really works though when you've got kids who are already really engaged. And for kids who are younger than actually the target age of the movie, they have an idea of it that isn't necessarily what it is. And so he was trying to do this without actually showing them the movie, but instead telling them the story. And because they think they really love Star Wars, as long as he could keep that story consistent, they could begin to play with some of those principles around something they really cared about. So any other examples like that? Are there things, you mentioned taking the Girl Scouts to do Little House on the Prairie. Has anyone else done this kind of transmedia work in your own classroom? I would love to hear about it. Any ideas that came up today? Something you would want to try? Yes, in the back.
In our after-school program, we were using ABC sorry, but they have a SpongeBob game there. And the kids invented their own SpongeBob games. So we had a really good time mapping out the challenges and getting to the end and sharing our games. And they were pretty engaged.
Yes.
There's a lot of physics.
That's something that I love to watch, is let kids create their own game or create their own story based on something.
It wasn't on a computer, it was on paper, but
Yeah.
we used the computer as an inspiration.
Right, to get them
Invented
into
our
it.
own SpongeBob challenges.
And you said it's a lot of physics, is that what you said?
Yeah, levers and catapults, they all get into that.
I can almost guarantee you that SpongeBob is not based on real physics principles, so I love that you layered it on top of it.
Excuse me, it wasn't SpongeBob, Snail Bob. Sorry, I get them confused.
Snail Bob?
Snail Bob.
I don't know that.
It's a snail that's trying to deliver a birthday present.
Okay.
And there are a lot of obstacles along the way.
Snail Bob.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. No.
They're all the same to me.
have any of you had kids write fan fiction or write kind of stories based on characters? Yes.
Well, I'm a music teacher, and I found this really cool thing of video game composition.
Uh-huh.
So they created their characters and storyline, and then they picked which music would go with the character. So like if it's an evil character, it would have evil music.
Oh, that's
So nice.
great. Yeah.
Pretty well.
So creating music that goes along with the story, setting that mood, that's wonderful. Yeah, it's great to hear.
We took Where the Wild Things Are several years ago, and I taught a class with students with emotional needs, and we mentored a class of students with autism. So we rewrote the book to where our students were the monsters and the students Max. It was a class of Maxes who went and visited our students. So they formed a friendship, and then they wrote a play, and then filmed the play, and so it's a social.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's a wonderful, that's a wonderful transmedia kind of experience. That's great. Are you going to do it again?
I don't teach anymore.
Oh,
So,
okay.
no.
But it would have been something you had repeated?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Any other, okay, sure.
Question.
Sure, I'll
So
take a
I
question.
teach 8th grade special ed.
Mhm. 8th grade special ed.
Do you have any higher level ideas
For older kids?
for older kids?
Well, certainly, I mean, things like Star Wars and Harry Potter might be interesting. Superheroes are really, really big. And so the trick is really to think about what are some natural, if you're willing to get into the concept itself, get into like superheroes, you could be thinking about, math. There's a book out there called Superhero School. Have you all seen this? It's a picture book. And it's basically all these kids with superpowers. They go to school thinking they're going to get to like train at their superpowers, but they actually are in math class. And they're so annoyed and bored until they realize when there actually is a threat that they needed all that math to make their powers work better. It's not for 8th graders, but there's an idea there that you could bring to superheroes, certainly, to be thinking about like, how would this character fly? And how, does the cape help with that or not? Like beginning to try to break down some curriculum areas using a story. So I think just thinking about what the kids are into and trying to connect. It's more work for you, but it can be interesting.
To parallel this, I'm an intensive needs teacher, 5th, 6th grade, and struggling with finding characters for them to relate to that aren't Barney, that aren't getting them to kind of be a little more typical peer age interests. I struggle with this too. And there's a lot of great curriculum and stuff that my kids would really relate to here, but the pushback I often get is from parents saying, my kid needs to move past Sesame Street and Barney.
Right,
and
right.
as we're trying to push them into a regular ed setting, and all they talk about is Barney and doing this. So finding those more grown-up characters that they can relate to is really tricky.
Right, right. Have you found any that you feel like worked well?
No, and that's what I struggle with. Again, they're very much into this age level. It's just the characters they relate to right now developmentally, and
Right.
so struggling with kind of pushing them forward with characters that they can relate to.
Mhm.
I used to work with special needs kids, and I taught 8th, 9th, 10th graders.
Yes.
And they loved reading.
Yes.
Loved it.
Yeah.
But were afraid to go out and tell.
They loved reading Rainbow at 8th and 9th graders.
So we developed a strategy that they were evaluators of reading Rainbow. And so they were helping me design lessons and activities for younger grades.
Oh,
So
yes,
they
well,
would then
mentorship
have
idea. That's a
volunteers
great idea.
That their job
Right.
was to take reading Rainbow, and in some cases Sesame Street is what we consider to be the book
And be an evaluator.
to consume it, and then recommend how to use it, how to keep forward the concepts.
So you're being sneaky
So
about it.
That's a great idea. For anyone who didn't hear it, was asking the kids to be the advisor, like review this with me and tell me how I would teach other kids to do it, or maybe even help teach
Yeah,
the other
and they have
kids.
little notebooks to, take notes and tell me how would you use this. Here's given scenarios. I have a 3rd grade student that is struggling with the letter T. And I want you to watch this book, Sesame Street, with the letter T, and tell me what you would do using this book to help the student learn the letter T. And actually, it was the kid that he decided to be the one with the letter T.
Yes, yeah.
And
That's great. That's a really, really fun idea. Any other examples or ideas? And while I'm doing that, I'm going to pass these around. I mentioned PBS LearningMedia as being a great resource for all this PBS stuff. If you want to give us your name, email address, we'll go to New Hampshire Public Television to keep you up to speed on what's on LearningMedia. It's all free. And also, there's going to be a drawing.
There's going to be a drawing put out, a lovely tote bag with lovely gifts for everybody. So
Tote bag with PBS gifts.
you get me your forms that you run out, you go to table 16. We've got more next topics to mention, so we have to vote on this discussion. We do a series of family, math, science, STEM notes using Peck Black Cat, Curious George, and Oxford. So we'll come into school and work with your parents and kids, set up organizations around a large gathering room, and actually the equipment we use, we do the measuring with the finding treasures and all of that. So if you're interested, we're free. They're typically held during the school week in the early evening from like 6:30 to 7:30-ish or 6 to 7, so they can eat something really quick. And we can work with you to design something either program specific or topic specific. So we can work on something change or measurements or whatever. But we use a clip to show parents how to engage kids with offline activities as well as online activities. We do a companion workshop that you can have and use with the class and help use them with parents.
That's great. Yeah, this is Susan Adams from nhpt.org, and she's in booth 16. This is one of the things I love about PBS is that we have boots on the ground in every community. So it's not just about the national feed. If you ever have questions how to use things, call your local station because they probably are doing workshops and things in your area. And Susan's doing a lot of really great stuff. So we had an example here.
I love Liberty Kids.
Yeah, Liberty Kids. Yeah, he's
Because
really, yeah.
it's for the older and they love it. And you just get so much history in there.
Yeah, that's great. And I heard when that show, I've been at PBS for almost 17 years, and so I was there when Liberty's Kids were there, and I heard about a lot of teachers using that as kind of, because they were always writing things down in their notebooks, the Liberty's Kids, and encouraging kids to be writing down their own history and thinking about it. So we're right at time. If anyone has more questions, feel free to come up. I'll be here for a little bit. But thank you so much for participating and being part of this discussion. I've loved talking about transmedia. And enjoy the rest of the conference. We then, every episode of Peck Black Cat includes, kind of like Odd Squad always goes into the math room, Peck does math in the bath. And so every episode,
More fairy treasure. Good work. So
by different teachers and educational advisors to be trying. Any ideas that came up today? Something you would want to try? Yes, in the back.
In our after-school program, we were using ABC sorry, but they have a SpongeBob game there. And the kids invented their own SpongeBob game. So we had a really good time mapping out the challenges and getting to the end and sharing our games. And they were pretty engaged.
Fiction or write kind of stories based on characters? Yeah.
Well, I'm a music teacher, and I found this really cool thing of video game composition. So they created their characters.
Sure.
So I teach 8th grade special ed.
8th grade social. Do you need help with that or not? You know, like beginning to try to break down some curriculum areas using the story. So I think just thinking about the
And it is we're trying to push them into a regular ed setting, and all they talk about is Barney and doing this. So finding those more grown-up characters that they can relate to is really tricky.
Right. Have you found any that you feel like work well?
No, and that's what I struggle with. Again, they're very much into this age level. It's just the characters they relate to right now developmentally, and so struggling with kind of pushing them forward.
Yeah, it used to be on PBS.
It's for the older, and they love it. And
it's like a history.
Get so much history in that.
Yeah, that's great. And I heard